A man becomes dangerous when he is addicted to growth. Walk on. It was a quiet morning in a small town, the kind where nothing ever seemed to change. The people moved through their days like clockwork, familiar faces in familiar places, but there was one man who never quite fit in. He wasn't born into greatness, didn't inherit wealth, and yet he carried a fire that no one could explain. His name was Thomas. Everyone knew him as the quiet loner, the guy who kept to himself, but there was something dangerous about him, something no one could put their finger on. It wasn't his sharp jawline or his cold stare. No, it was something far more unsettling. He was addicted to growth. It started small. A few books here and there, a couple of podcasts, and a gym membership he'd barely use. But as the days passed, he dove deeper. The hunger for self-improvement became an obsession, a force that drove him to chase mastery in everything, from his health, his skills, to the way he carried himself in a room. People began to notice the shift, but they didn't know how to react. It was as if he was slowly becoming someone else, and it scared them. Because here's the thing, there's something terrifying about a man who doesn't stop, a man who wakes up every day with the relentless desire to become more, who dares to ask, what if I could be more than what I am right now? But as Thomas's power grew, so did his isolation. He became more of a shadow, no longer a part of the world he once inhabited. People watched from afar, unsure whether they admired him or feared what he might become. Some even warned him to stop, to slow down before he lost himself in the process. But then, one evening, something happened that none of them saw coming. A single choice, a decision made in the quiet of the night, changed everything. It was the kind of town where the sound of a car engine was a rarity, and the rustling of leaves was the loudest thing you'd hear at midnight. People didn't seek out excitement, they didn't crave change, and they certainly didn't understand Thomas. He didn't grow up like them. His father had been a simple man, a mechanic who could fix anything from a broken-down car to a busted generator. His mother, a school teacher, had always believed in hard work over talent. They weren't wealthy, nor were they poor. They just lived. But Thomas, from an early age, had always felt like he was meant for something bigger, something more. At first, no one noticed. They didn't realize that the quiet, introverted boy was quietly, obsessively rewriting his story. He didn't need their validation. He just needed to know if it was possible, if he could change the course of his life and make something remarkable of it. So he started small. Books. He devoured them. Not the light reads his classmates enjoyed, but books that challenged everything he knew about the world. He read about ancient warriors, the great philosophers, the lives of men who had broken free from mediocrity. He found himself in their stories. They weren't born into greatness either. They fought, they struggled, they clawed their way to power. He was no different, but the books weren't enough. Soon, he found himself pushing harder, doing more. Every day was an opportunity to improve. His body grew stronger, sharper. He woke up early, ran until his legs burned, lifted weights until his muscles screamed for mercy. But even that wasn't enough. It was his mind that began to race faster than ever before. Podcasts on self-development, mental toughness, financial freedom, they consumed him. He had to know more. The hunger grew deeper. As his knowledge expanded, so did his ambition. He became unstoppable. But something else started to change, something far darker. He began to feel the pull of isolation. He'd walk into a room and people would fall silent. They didn't know how to talk to him anymore. They didn't understand him. And as much as he tried, he couldn't connect with them the way he once did. Their conversations seemed shallow, their aspirations smaller than his own. In the beginning, he didn't mind. He was on a mission, one that had nothing to do with them. He needed to prove to himself that he could become someone powerful. But slowly he began to notice the strange looks, the whispers behind his back. They feared him, and yet they didn't know why. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the town, Thomas stood alone on the edge of a cliff. The wind tugged at his clothes, but he didn't notice. His mind was elsewhere. He had reached the point where growth wasn't just an aspiration, it was a need. Every moment of his day had to be productive. There was no room for wasted time. The relentless pursuit had consumed him, and he wondered, what would happen if he pushed even harder? What if he left this place behind? What if he left everything? Family, friends, his town, and chased greatness without any constraints? As the wind howled around him, a thought struck him. Am I becoming the very thing I feared? But there was no turning back now. Thomas made his choice. He walked back down from the cliff, his mind set on the path ahead. He would go to the city. He would leave everything he knew behind. It wasn't about success anymore. It was about becoming the kind of man who couldn't be ignored. The kind of man who would leave his mark on history. When he arrived in the city, it was nothing like he expected. People were fast, driven, and distracted. They had no time for his quiet ambition. They were too busy chasing their own versions of success. But Thomas wasn't discouraged. He'd always known he was different. He carved his place. Slowly at first, then with a force that surprised even him. He didn't need to fit in anymore. He didn't care about their opinions. He was addicted to growth, and that addiction had transformed him into something dangerous. As he rose, the people around him began to feel the pull of his power. His transformation wasn't just external, it was internal. He had learned to control his emotions, to manipulate his thoughts, to master his desires. But as his power grew, so did the loneliness. And in that silence, a new realization dawned on him. Growth, true growth, didn't come from reaching the top. It came from understanding the cost of the climb. The last time he spoke to his old friends, they told him he'd changed. That the man they once knew was gone. They didn't understand. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see that Thomas had left everything behind to become a man who didn't need anyone to define him. He had outgrown them. And yet, in the quiet of the night, when the world was still, Thomas would find himself standing on the edge once more, staring into the abyss. Because the truth was simple. You can only climb so high before you start to fall. But maybe, just maybe, the fall wasn't a failure. It was the final step to becoming who you were always meant to be. So what happens when a man becomes addicted to growth? What does it mean to constantly push forward, to always strive for more, even when it costs you everything? And when does a man realize that the thing he was chasing all along, the power, the success, the growth, was never the real goal? What do you think? Is growth a dangerous addiction or the key to becoming everything we can be? Drop a comment below with the phrase, "walk on," if you've made it this far. Let me know what you think about Thomas's journey. And if you want to hear more stories about the cost of success, don't forget to like and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. The journey is far from over. Stay tuned for what comes next.